Hello and welcome back to another episode of Japan at War. Now, this is actually part 2 of a video series that me and Nick from the Shogunate have been doing. So if you haven't watched that video yet, you might want to, because it'll make this video make a lot more sense. The link will be in the pinned comment down below. Go check it out, and then obviously come back here and watch this video.
Continuing our discussion regarding Hideyoshi, it is time we dived into the extremely significant Greater East Asian conflict that he would end up plunging Japan into, the Imjin War. Hideyoshi's failed invasion of Korea. What I want to do first is start off by arguing against the war to begin with, before moving on to discuss the 3 alternative leaders who I suggested in part 1 of this video, as to who I suggest would be a potential superior alternative to him as Japan's second great unifier, and what they would have done regarding an invasion of the mainland. But with that said, as for the war itself, justifiably I think it can go either way. I understand why he would want to do it, given that he had the potential to save the face of his family name and legacy going forward, hopefully even cementing his dynasty's reign for generations to come. But still, there is large debate regarding that had he not pushed Japan into such a conflict, there were still other ways he could have strengthened his regime, be it through his own named heir Toyotomi Hideyoshi, but also the inevitable birth of his son, Hideyori. Having a legitimate heir within his family to assume leadership upon his death was something huge that he feared about, and had he not plunged Japan into a foreign war, it is really anyone's guess as to what may have happened in the years going forward. So I do believe it is safe to say that the invasion was not necessary in terms of strengthening his own family's rule. Yet another obvious reason as to why he should have avoided, or should have been persuaded to avoid, the conflict was simply that Hideyoshi by this point was not in the correct state of mind or judgment to have orchestrated such a conquest. In his later years, Hideyoshi is said to have had a slow descent into madness, as his mental state deteriorated. This led to lies, false hope, and above all, some stupid decisions during the course of the war. But the major one that I want to focus on was the huge issue of the Japanese Navy. Although Hideyoshi tried hard to gear up Japan's navy for the war to come, and he did succeed in building a massive fleet, it was not one that was considerably up to date when compared to the navies of his mainland enemies, specifically Korea. Japanese vessels lacked not only experienced commanders and sailors, but also lacked cannons, which would become an extreme detriment. This is something that should have been 100% planned out for better, before the invasion was actually underway, because as it would turn out, Japan's defeat at sea would in the end have direct impact to their inevitable withdrawal on land. But lastly now, I want to turn away from Hideyoshi to look at my 3 alternatives and address if each of them would have gone into war with China and Korea, and if so, what they might have done differently. In the first part of this video, the 3 alternatives I gave to Hideyoshi were Tokugawa Ieyasu, Oda Nobunaga by means of Shibata Katsuie, and Akechi Mitsuhide. For Ieyasu, I think it is clear he would have not pressed Japan forth into a conflict like this. We saw what happened when he did succeed the Toyotomi, and I just plain do not feel that he ever would have dared to threaten the security of Japan like this and risk jeopardizing his own family's power. I also do not believe that Akechi Mitsuhide would have ever committed Japan to a conquest like this, but that too probably largely depends on just how ambitious he would have been moving forward following a hypothetical victory at Yamazaki. This just leaves Nobunaga. Now, it was originally Oda Nobunaga who expressed his interest in the idea of invading the mainland, so with Nobunaga being his son and perhaps wishing to follow in his father's footsteps, I could potentially see him deciding on a conquest like this once the rest of Japan was unified. But what would he do differently than Hideyoshi? Well, personally, I think it depends on who was around him as retainers during his reign. With competent and veteran leaders like Shibata Katsuie and the rest of the Oda elders surrounding him, the chain of command and overall planning of the invasion may have been more of a collaborative effort. This may have led to more synergy going forward. If this was the case, with more voices rising up to offer thoughts and opinions about the campaign, it may have overall seen more success. But once again, this is all just hypothetical. We have no true idea how this may have went down. However, this is largely what I personally believe may have indeed happened if it did. Now, while in the first part of this video on my channel, I took a stance that was opposed to both the first and second unifiers. But here with Tokugawa Ieyasu, I'm going to do the opposite and support him. Why do I feel that Ieyasu was the right man for the job in finishing the whole process of bringing Japan into a new era of peace and stability? Well, it largely has to do with how Toyotomi Hideyoshi left Japan after his death. Hideyoshi left Japan in really the worst case scenario for his regime. The country was supposed to be ruled by various councils of daimyo, all spread across Japan with their own interests, while Hideyoshi's son and heir was sort of groomed into being the next Kampaku. Now, you can make the case that peace would have remained intact regardless, and to that I say, peace for how long, or at what cost? The heir to the Toyotomi clan was just a young child who would be raised by other significant figures, many of whom, like I mentioned, would try to groom him to see their best interests. What I am getting at is that Hideyori would likely have grown up to be potentially a very weak ruler on his own, heavily influenced by stronger lords around him. This could have even been a trend that would have continued on into future generations of the Toyotomi family. It was a weakness like that which we saw with the Ashikaga shoguns centuries earlier that resulted in the outbreak of the Sengoku period. And for that reason alone, I feel it is just cause that the system needed to be reforged, and that a truly concrete strong regime take over and finish things off. Which leads me to my next point. Why Tokugawa Ieyasu? Ieyasu is someone who had a lot going for him. He had name recognition and even had traced his lineage back to the prestigious Minamoto clan. He had been one of the strongest supporters of Oda Nobunaga, who under him would come to dominate a massive stretch of the Tokaido Road, from Mikawa to Suruga. Later, he would butt heads with Hideyoshi and face him down at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, but ultimately Ieyasu knew he could not withstand Hideyoshi and chose to instead later swear loyalty to him. This had later resulted in the acquisition of the entire Kanto region following the demise of the Hojo clan in 1590. This alone made him one of the mightiest powers in the entire country, and put him in a far-off position so that when Hideyoshi begun his invasion of Korea, Ieyasu's distance ended up being a great arguing point as to why he was unable to send troops of his own. As Hideyoshi was nearing death, he would recognize the might of the Tokugawa and elevate Ieyasu to the highest council, made up of 5 regents or elders. They were known as Gotairo, and upon Hideyoshi's death were meant to act as guardians to his son Hideyori and to be the intermediary heads of the nation. Because of all this, Ieyasu by 1598 had become the strongest and most influential daimyo in all of Japan. There was really no better choice for someone to take over. He had a powerful name, a strong and stable line of succession, and military might to back everything up. And this would all be shown to work out very well, as upon his takeover following the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he would go on to become the new shogun, and forge his very own shogunate in his new capital of Edo. The power and influence of his family would go on to rule for over 2 more centuries.
There are 3 things that I would like everyone to consider as I move forward with my reasons why Tokugawa was not a good successor: military might, economy, and ability to innovate. And I'm sure you're thinking, what is this guy talking about? Tokugawa Ieyasu had to be a military powerhouse. After all, he did establish himself as the new shogun at the end. The Battle of Sekigahara is usually talked about as some grand strategic masterpiece for the Tokugawa, and it wasn't. Not only was his army smaller, but the battle itself wasn't going that great for him. The biggest thing that Tokugawa had going for him was that his enemy, Ashita Mitsunari, wasn't very liked. And throughout the battle, his orders were ignored. Now that's not a good look on him, but at the same time, that doesn't mean Ieyasu was being a tactical genius. Nor was the betrayals that day attributed to that supposed genius. This guy won simply because Mitsunari wasn't liked, and because of that, his orders weren't often listened to, and people betrayed him. In short, I would find it incredibly questionable to point to Sekigahara as evidence of Ieyasu being some type of brilliant strategist. Instead, it's just evidence that people didn't like Ashita Mitsunari. In reality, Tokugawa benefited military from a few key strategies. 1. align yourself with those stronger, even if it means killing your wife and son to continue doing so. 2. Have brilliant strategists serve you, such as Honda Tadakatsu, who easily is one of the reasons why Tokugawa Ieyasu won as many battles as he did. Legendary strategist Takeda Shingen even called the man a luxury for the Tokugawa. Of course, Ie Naomasa and others were incredibly talented commanders as well, which only helped him further. Now, let's talk about the economy. And I also want to throw in some of the stabilizing policies that were implemented, as those are important. Let's get that out of the way first. Probably the biggest policy that stabilized the country was one that required samurai to take up residence in the town for a certain amount of time during the year, which made it hard for rebellions to start up. Now, this isn't a bad policy at all. However, it's incorrectly attributed to Tokugawa Ieyasu. This was a policy started by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. In fact, a lot of the most successful policies were just really a continuation of Hideyoshi's policies. In reality, where Ieyasu was successful was just figuring out a way to pass on power through legitimate heirs. As far as economic growth is concerned, well, it did grow. My only real contention would be on the restriction of the warrior class from entering into certain businesses, such as pottery making and really any role as a merchant. This put a massive strain on the warrior class that would eventually lead to tensions. This, of course, would be a big part of what would lead into the Boshin War and the removal of the Tokugawa Shogunate entirely. And as far as innovation is concerned, and I do have to say, Ieyasu himself ruled for a very short time, so I'm really using his successors more so than him to make that point. At times, it feels like one step forward, 2 steps back. And yes, I'm pinning this one on Ieyasu because, well, I can. You start a dynasty, you better set yourself up as a great example for your successors to not make said mistakes. Like the Red Seal ships. And what exactly were these Red Seal ships? They were Japanese armed merchant sailing ships bound for Southeast Asian ports, which also apparently included India. And they had these sealed letters patent issued by the early Tokugawa Shogunate. They were responsible for bringing in numerous goods, such as materials, exotic wares, and sometimes they even brought back different technologies and techniques on how to make stuff. Sadly, these trading vessels had less than 35 years of activity. And why was it only active that long? Because the shogunate did not want his civilians to travel outside the country because they were scared of foreign ideas. This led to massive stagnation with its military technology and led to foreign powers having the means to force Japan open. Something that could have been easily avoided had they kept up trade. Anyways, that's my arguments. Please comment down below in your opinions. I'm sure we would actually love to both hear them and read them. See you next time. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to check out more of my content, just go ahead and click, well, either of the ones on the screen. I know you want to. And hey, if you're new, why not hit that subscribe button and also hit the bell for notifications? See you next time, guys.